Aloha, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. My name is SprinkleBeard. We stream every day except for Sundays over on twitch.tv/SprinkleBeard from 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time to about 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Sometimes that time is affected, but not often. Follow us on the Discord or Twitter. The Twitter handle is Sprinkle_Beard. It's right on the bottom layout of the video down that way. But yeah, today we get to review Ice Golem's Peak. Now, Ice Golem's Peak is actually the most inconsistent of the dungeons, and it's one of the dungeons that I would encourage for players that need gear or need better gear to not do early. The reason that we don't encourage to do it early is that it is, again, the most inconsistent. It's one of the hardest dungeons to leave on auto, and even your most veteran players often get caught off guard by a certain attack or by something that gets desynced in the fight. And the fight can get extraordinarily desynced unless you really have a team that does the exact same thing every single time, which you don't really get to until you're like at 5-star, 6-star gear and your champions are in this super amazing spot. So let's not wait any longer. As you progress through the dungeon, right? So when you first start off, the big thing to know about these dungeons is each of these dungeons that we're going to be covering for the next 4 days drop gear of blue rarity or higher. So that means blue, purple, or legendary. These are all extra stats for your character. These also let you shape your character in a very specific manner. So when somebody tells you you need 100% crit rate on your champion, coming to things like Ice Golem, Dragon, or Fire Knight, these three specifically can drop you gloves that have crit rate on them. And then in addition to crit rate, maybe you need substats of speed and accuracy. If you're wondering how the upper players do that, this is exactly how they do it. They farm these 3 levels until they get one of these 3 levels, depending on what their goals are or who's on their team and who works best, blah, blah, blah. The point, though, is this is where you can get your gear, and it's not the gray gear or green gear that you get from the campaign. And it's the big reason that if you need item upgrades, this is the best place to go. Down the left-hand side here, we have different sets that the Ice Golem can drop. I'm going to cover them extraordinarily quickly, and it's up to you on how you want to gear your champion. You can look up gear sets on certain characters, but as a newer player, there's very few gear sets that you really want to heavily invest in. It's kind of one of those things that it is better for you to farm up an enormous pool of gear first, get the right stats on your character in the right spaces. We have a gear-based video, or I'll be doing a new one after this series, probably before I start doing my champion review series, to help players better understand how to gear up their champions properly, what sets you can take advantage of early, blah, blah, blah. Let's not talk about the future. Let's talk about what's going on now, right? So the life set increases HP by 15%, and it's a 2-piece set. Very, very good set. Very, very usable. Offense set increases attack by 15%, and it's a 2-piece set. Good on attacking champs only, right? Pretty much every champion can take advantage of having extra life or having that extra survivability. So that's why we give it the very good. Offense, since it's only good on attack champions, and even then there's kind of better sets, in all honesty, than offense. It does not mean that you're going to want to sell any gear from the offensive set that you get. It just means I would not focus on trying to equip a champion in full offensive gear unless you're doing some weird shenanigan thing, right? Defense set increases defense by plus 15%. And again, it's a 2-piece set. All these 2-piece sets are very, very amazing because it makes getting those extra benefits extraordinarily easy. So I personally love these 2-piece sets. Defense is kind of almighty, right? It's just flat damage reduction. So the higher your character's defenses are, the better, and the better they can take advantage of this. Crit rate increases crit rate by 12%. I personally love this set, and especially for brand new players, getting to your 100% crit rate on some of your attack champions or even some of your defense or HP champions if you want them to be a damage dealing champion. This is a great way to work in extra crit rate without having to give up, a crit rate slot. Even better is that, let's say you find a body armor from the crit rate set and it has a substat of crit rate, and then the set bonus is crit rate. It can get you up to those 100% very, very quickly. Resistance plus 40, and it's a 2-piece set. Absolutely amazing. Resistance is your character's ability to block a debuff from being placed on them. And to super nutshell it, if your opponent's accuracy is higher, they are probably going to land that debuff as long as their percent chance of landing the debuff hits. So in the case of War Maiden, who has a base 75% chance of landing her A3, a defensive down, will more often go off on your champion than not. Likewise, if you have more resistant, you're more likely to block that debuff. So if you're terrified of things like War Maiden, things like the resistance gear can be a good solution. It's usually a lot better on your support champions or maybe certain tanks that help your party survive longer, because the more often that they can cast their survival skills, the better. You don't want a character that's an AoE healer that gets frozen or stunned or gets burst down because they have no resistance. It is still very good on things like attack champions, because likewise, if your nuke is about to go and then he gets frozen and he can't get off his attack, resistance is kind of good on any champion. Understand, though, it is more of the defensive incline of skills, because you first have to either take the damage or be hit by that ability, which is more reactive than proactive. And on this channel, we're very focused on the proactive first. Retaliation. It's a 4-piece set. 35% chance to counterattack when hit. What makes this great is that it's whenever you are hit. So any attack animation from your opponent, any attack, I guess, not animation, but any attack can cause you to retaliate. So things like poison and HP burn, no, they will not set off the retaliation set. So be mindful about something like that. Very good on champions who have really good A1s. So maybe something like Skullcrown or Bellower that attacks everything, or champions that have an A1 that maybe has a really powerful debuff, like a defensive down, a poison, speed down, right? It just depends champion to champion. Again, make sure that your champion is bulky enough. On attack champions, this is a very hard set to use reliably, unless you have a way of increasing their defenses so that they can reliably retaliate. Otherwise, they're probably only getting off one attack anyways. Reflex. It's a 4-piece set. 40% chance to reduce the random skill cooldown. So this means that when your character takes damage, and it has to be so much damage, you have a 40% chance to reduce a random skill cooldown by 1. This has amazing potential to it. I don't know anybody who actually runs it, because again, it's not reliable. And to make a character reliable, they might only be able to have like 2 skills on them. I am sure there's certain characters that can take really good advantage of this. So for instance, provoking champions, right, could be great with this, because they want to be attacked anyways, and then getting cooldowns on their skills would make them more useful in that regard. And that, if their main goal is to hyper provoke, like if you want to provoke and keep your character, your opponent locked down, this skill has potential, right? Next is the Cursed set. It's a 4-piece set, 75% chance to place a 50% heal reduction debuff when attacking, right? This has extraordinarily limited use because it's only the 50% heal reduction. However, when you're first starting off and you're fighting the Spirit Keep, this set can be very good for something like that. Or if there's a boss or a certain opponent that you're fighting. So like, let's say you fight apothecaries in the arena and you just cannot kill them. Things like the Curse set, because it's so reliable at getting that heal reduction, could be a very good set for you to play with. And it gets away around things like resistance because it's a set bonus. It will just happen anyways. It just has a chance of occurring because it's 75%. It's very reliable. I don't know who actually uses this set. This, again, is one of those sets where, yes, you could put it on a champion, so maybe on an assassin like Feign or Whisper, right? Something like that. Maybe you would put that on them if you were struggling with a certain healer and you were just getting fed up with it. That would be a terrible set to put on those champions, though. If they're assassins, you want them doing more damage, not placing on a debuff for prolonged fights, right? Last but not least, the Taunting set has a 30% chance to place a provoke debuff. So you can taunt your opponent into attacking you. There are a few champions that take advantage of this that want to be constantly attacked, that are usually defensive champions that either attack all or attack one character multiple times. So there are characters that can use this. Again, I would not be so critical on these set bonuses as a new player. There's a different dungeon where the set bonuses are amazing. I would focus more on those. As a newer player, I would focus on getting the highest ranked gear that you can in certain slots. So like if your champion is an attack champion, give them a 4-star or 5-star weapon, right? Even if their 3-star weapon has amazing substats on it, like a triple roll in speed, which would be amazing. The difference between a 3-star and a 5-star weapon is massive. So for an attack champion, they need that. For a defense or support champion, getting them a shield that is 4-star or 5-star is that same thing. Get their defensive stat as high as possible, as quickly as possible. And even like your attacker, right? If you feel like your attacker is dying a lot, get them a new shield. So without further ado, let us get into the actual dungeon. Understand that depending on your champions, which are completely random, and what gear you get, which is completely random, that will greatly change your progress through the game. Don't compare yourself to somebody else, what level they're at. It does depend on what champions they get, when they get them, how good that champion is in certain content, and there's times where it's just not fair to compare it. The last thing that I need to talk about before we actually jump in is here we can see you can get 1 to 2-star gear. In my opinion, 1 to 2-star gear is always sell. Just always sell. If you are a brand new player, you should not be in Ice Golem. I would recommend just stay in the campaign, get your base stats higher, and farm for 3-star gear in the campaign, which will be much more easy and reliable there, because you need to get to at least stage 3 to get 2 to 3-star gear reliably. And then realistically, you'd want to get to this 4-star. You're going to need champions in 3-star gear to get there semi-reliably. Understand that once you get up to stage 5, right, and you can farm 3 and 4-star gear reliably, you could sit here for a bit and start gearing up some champions. I wouldn't recommend it. I think you're going to be spending a lot of time and energy fighting this Ice Golem, but you could, right? This is the first place where you're getting at minimum 3 and 4-star gear. This could be a good place to go too, that if you've been playing for, like, let's say a week, and you're like, oh man, I'm really struggling on this campaign boss, but I do have a champion that's amazing for Ice Golem. For that reason, yeah, maybe you come here and farm 3 and 4-star gear just to get away from the 1 and 2-star gear. I don't know any player that's ever happened to be honest. And normally in the campaign, I can suggest players go farm this lifesteal set, go farm this crit rate set. And players have told me, holy crap, that made a huge difference, farming up that one set, and that pushed me well past this boss. Or, oh, I didn't realize that champion could crit for that hard. Wow, that's all I needed. So it just depends. As you get to things like this, 3 and 4-star gear, you should phase out all your 1 and 2-star gear. As you get to here, where you're getting 3 to 5-star gear, you should start trying to phase out your 3-star gear. It does depend, though, because, again, some of the substats do matter a lot. Again, we're going to have another video after this whole series talking about each item slot, what characters want what, and understand it is champion for champion basis, and then how you want that champion to be. One of my favorite talks is champions like Syl of the Drakes. I have heard every build for Syl of the Drakes. Heavy HP build so that when she heals back an enormous amount of her HP. I've heard of a defensive build so that she's this unmovable tank that just takes no damage, and then when she heals herself, at the start of her turn, all the damage that she took is just kind of erased. I've seen damage builds, which is what I'm more partial to, that she's built tanky, but she can still put out a good bit of damage because her crit rate is high enough. Just depends on what you're doing, blah, 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 blah. For the purpose of these videos, we do go to the hardest stage, and as you can see, I've actually not completed it. So we're going to try to do that here for you guys. And we're going to talk about what Ice Golem does, and the reason that we're doing it on the hardest setting is that we want you as a newer player to have the expectation of what is it going to be like at its most difficult. Understand this isn't going to show off every single wave of enemy, because if I wanted to do that, I'd have to play through Void, Force, Spirit, and Magic. For you as a newer player, aiming for stage 20 is the best. It's where you get 5-star and 6-star gear reliably and is the best on energy. Most players do not actually farm stage 25. Stage 25 does have the highest chance for legendaries and specifically 6-star gear. However, it is still a roll of the dice and it is still a very negligible amount. So most players that are farming for their best gear stay on stage 24. And then for things like tournaments or events like Dungeon Divers, most players stay at stage 20 on majority of stages. Spider Queen will be its own exception. We'll talk about Spider Queen when we get there. So, Force is going to be my best friend here. And specifically, that must have been a challenge run that I was working on. Specifically, what we were focused on is by having the affinity bonus, when this boss gets off a weak hit on us, from us having the affinity advantage, we have a greater chance of resisting those debuffs. If he gets a weak hit, he cannot place on a debuff onto us. So with that being said, we want to try to focus on having as many of the positive affinity, especially into this dungeon, which is much more important than the other dungeons. Here, what I'm going to do is load up on a lot of defensive champions, and then I always like to bring a reviver. In this case, I'm going to have 2 revivers. This one's an AoE healer. This one is an AoE shielder, and she blocks debuffs. I believe that block debuffs on this boss is incredibly, incredibly valuable. So if you are struggling, things like Sepulture Sentinel, who also has a block debuff, or Blind Seer, who has a block debuff, can be extremely, extremely useful. Instead of bringing Sepulture, I'm actually going to bring my Skull Crown because she's a lot better for consistent damage. A lot of the times I like bringing in things like my Mashalad, who just heavily controls the fight. The other thing I could do is, instead of bringing Blind Seer, Ursula puts on a defensive up and a strengthen, and this boss hits incredibly hard. So having things like an attack down and a defense up or a strengthen buff goes a long way on this boss. And so actually now, looking at my party and seeing that I don't have that, I am going to switch some things up. I'm going to bring Versolf, who has a defensive up and an ally protect to help the longevity of my team. Unfortunately, I actually don't have a reliable... I maybe could bring in a Chalk. I don't know how reliable of a healer I have in a Chalk right now. But let's try him. Let's try him. You know what? For the video, right? Sunday, you love a Chalk. Yeah, you do. You love him. So when it comes to these waves, the best thing for you is to dispatch them as quickly as you can with your champions. This will vary account to account, player to player. Understand there's no way to say, you know, just bring this one champion. Yes, there are champions that more frequently will give you very big advantages in certain content. It does vary, though, account to account. There's no way to say that, you know, this one champion absolutely clears this content. Champions like Dark Elhain, who you get for 5 months of playing the game, can greatly help you out on content like this because she has an anti-freeze in her kit, and the dungeon boss does a lot of freezing. Although one of the minions does do a defensive down, and the other minion puts on a block healing, which could absolutely be detrimental to most players. And the boss can counterattack. So there's a lot of things that you want to be careful about, or that will greatly impact... Wait, what? Why didn't her crack? That's frustrating. Sorry, I did something intentional with Zargala there, and she was supposed to get off an extra attack that hits 3 times. Obviously, you can see that I have this fight very under control with Achak freezing things constantly. And then I also have Versulf, who can provoke constantly. So my team's never really in any danger at any point. This is going to become something very... There it goes. Very standard the higher level you get. You learn that controlling the battlefield will make things drastically easier on you. When you are a brand new player working on this content for the first time, it's more about you just being able to survive content, right? Having things like shields, defensive ups, all of these things will help you. And as you can see, I am I don't want to say struggling, but yes, I am slowly clearing this content, right? I am not plowing through it, even though I have the affinity advantage here. And that is okay. That is the part of, 25, is that we're fighting them at their maximum level, and it's just a slow, grindy process. I have 3 characters, actually, who have turn meter burns here as well. So by having these turn meter burns, I'm just stopping my opponents from ever getting a turn. And then I'm provoking them as well. This is a great way where the more champions you have, the more options that you have to complete things like this. One thing I just realized, I think Achak doesn't actually put on an HP burn, which will activate his healing. So he might be a terrible choice here, now that I think about it. I think I should have brought an HP burn champion to activate him. We'll see here on the last wave. The other big reason to control waves, especially the higher that you get, this scene right here is actually quite terrifying because there's 2 Seekers, and they can absolutely just make it feel like you're not doing anything and that your opponents are getting tons and tons of turns. This is where either AoE attackers or nukers, and in my case, I'm just trying to stop them from ever getting turns under any circumstance. Here I will switch to the unfrozen champion for my damage, because champions that are frozen, unlike a stun, get a damage reduction bonus of 25% for being frozen. So if you are trying to burst down a frozen champion, you feel like, man, why are they just not taking enough damage? That is the advantage or disadvantage, right? You are taking away their turn. However, they do get a damage nullification of 25%. Hi, Gomi. For being frozen. Here, I was trying to wait for these 2 characters to get their turn before trying to freeze again. But since it's taking too long, we will switch here. Having an AoE defensive down, I think, is also extremely critical on the higher end dungeons, or an AoE weaken is just as important. Unfortunately, I do not have an AoE weaken in this party. Here, Rosin has a chance to strip buffs from enemies, so I'm looking for champions that have that defensive buff up from this first Seeker, and I'm going to try to attack into things like that, so that I can just, slowly burst down these champions a little bit better. Here as well, attacking champions, like, until you can absolutely kill one, is going to be the most important or most useful. Maybe most noticeable is the best answer. And even though I'm kind of attacking all over the place, you will understand as you get further into the game what champions you fear, why you fear them, why they have become something of contest that you are worried about. It does just vary player to player what they fear, you know, why they fear it, what their champions are like. And again, some of your fights will be like this. You will just have a very slow, prolonged battle phase of just slowly killing things off. Obviously, make sure that if the opponent has a... Perfect. If the opponent has a reviver or a healer, they should heavily be one of your first targets, unless somewhere in your team comp you naturally have a an anti-heal, which some champion or some players do, right? Again, it does just vary champion to champ or player to player, what champions they get from what pulls, blah blah blah. Admittedly, this team is not my best offensive team. I did do this intentionally because when it comes to Ice Golem, I feel like he's kind of the most physically aggressive of the dungeon bosses. The other big thing is I actually didn't bring in one of his biggest counters, which is an anti-revive. Now, one of the big reasons behind that for me is that I actually don't have a lot of champions that are good at anti-revive, or ones that I think do enough of an anti-revive for me to really rely on. But again, just slowly chew your way through the waves. If you have better sustain, focus on that better sustain. A lot of the times, remember that if your team cannot be killed and you can stop your opponent from healing, you're probably going to win unless you get surprised, frozen, or, you know, nuked down. But obviously, the more you play, eventually you should be able to predict those a bit easier. All right, we are getting very close to the boss, and I'm excited. On these bosses, since I'm going to be fighting these bosses on 25, I am not going to do my normal thing where I let them get off like their full round of attacks to show everything off. The reason being is that they're going to be getting off their attacks anyways. There's no way for me to control these bosses. And in the case of Ice Golem here, I hate his guts. I actually spend the least amount of time in Ice Golem. I don't feel like I have a great Ice Golem team assembled, and even my best teams often get surprise killed from time to time because of the way Ice Golem works. All right, so we're finally up to Ice Golem. Let's review what he does. All turn meter reduction effects are decreased by 50% when used against this boss, meaning it is very, very difficult for you to 100% stop this boss from getting a turn, and he has a counterattack in his kit, so I would not encourage turn meter reduction against him. You're already at a 50% disadvantage relying on that. Damage from skills that scale based on maximum HP cannot exceed 10% of the boss's max HP when the boss is attacked. This was an old way for a lot of people to get through certain bosses, is they would take advantage of this enormous HP bar by bringing in champions like Coldheart or Royal Guard. So because he's at 25, that's an extra passive he's getting. You can use those strategies up until 20 though, right? So if you have Coldheart or Royal Guard, feel free to use them up until Ice Golem 20 very reliably. He's immune to all the hard CCs, including Provoke, HP Balance, HP Exchange, and cooldown increasing effects. Attacks all enemies one time whenever Clysis, which is his name, HP drops below 80%, 60, 45, 30, and 15. This attack will revive any dead allies to 100% HP. This attack ignores 50% of each enemy's defense for each alive ally. So killing off his allies and blocking the revive on them is massively helpful in this boss. Again, I do not have a good champion pool. I have 2 champions that are both spirit that could do that. And I barely use either one of them in Ice Golem, to be honest. The chance of placing a freeze debuff. Oh, this attack also has a 20% chance of placing a freeze debuff. The chance of placing this debuff increases by 40% for each ally alive. So if you leave both allies alive so that when he counterattacks, he doesn't revive them, he will have a 100% chance to freeze your team unless your team has proper resistances or a block debuff on, right? This is what makes him wildly inconsistent, is that unless you know when you are going to get him below 80%, below 60%, so on and so forth, and you can time it out properly and like maybe shield your team or block damage right before those attacks, it makes him very, very difficult to predict. And then you never know when on auto, when your AI is going to focus one of the little minions and focus them down first, or is going to focus, him with certain attacks. Every once in a while, AIs do really weird things, or, you may not crit on a certain attack, which will then throw the whole sequence way out of order. Just be mindful of that, right? Attacks all enemies and places a 50% decrease accuracy debuff for 2 turns. So for me, this means that Ice Golem is very fearful of debuffs, right? Placing things on him like a slow is incredibly, incredibly useful. Things like attack down or crit chance or crit damage down are very amazing on him. Bringing things like defense up and strengthen can greatly help your party survive pretty much anything this boss is doing. Continuous heals are amazing. However, this minion on the right does lower your defense, and the minion on the left does put on a block healing. So killing off these minions is even more useful. And if you try to ignore these two, unless you have a perpetual block debuffs that never ever gets interrupted, right? Like maybe you have 2 champions that both have block it for 2 turns. These 2 will actually do significant damage and put on very meaningful debuffs. Last but not least, his A1 is just attacks all enemies. So champions that maybe counterattack or have reflect damage or extend debuffs when attacked, like Tarogi the Frog or Aox the Rememberer. Ironically enough, both frog champions. That is something for you to take advantage of. Or if you have those champions, you could put a debuff on him like a poison or an HP burn. And with his enormous health pool, things like poisons and HP burns will be very useful on him as well. So we are I'm going to go for the anti-healer first. It doesn't... well, now he's frozen, so now I actually don't care about him at all. It doesn't matter truly who you go after, right? You might fear the defense down first because it bursts your champions down. Or like me, you might be like, I care about the heals and I want the heals back up. It again, is a case-by-case scenario. It depends on each player. Attack according to what makes the most sense for you and what your party is strong at. In the case that we are doing right now, my party is very good about locking down these little minions. So we are going to take the very slow approach since this is my first Ice Golem 25. And we're going to try to keep the minions dead as long as possible so that when Big Boy here does his counterattack, I don't have to, fear it absolutely annihilating my team. However, as you can see, whenever I freeze both the minions, it makes it so that I don't have to fear them at all, and they get damage reduction by being frozen. However, if I do get him below that 80% health, he is going to strike me back even harder. So potentially killing these champions, right? I hate saying this. It really just depends on what champions you bring. I have brought in a whole bunch of legendaries because that's where I'm at in the game. And then I love Zargala a whole lot. A Chalk I was bringing in as a healer. Admittedly, though, his passive's never going off because I don't have an HP burn anywhere in this team. And that's a huge mistake or flaw on my end. That is something that absolutely... If you're building a team right, there's no... And especially like on this boss as well, I should absolutely have that. I actually don't know why or how I wasn't paying enough attention to be like, oh, I don't have an HP burn here. Because that would help out significantly. That would be 3% of his max HP, you know, every turn. Or if I had an AoE HP burn across all the champions, that would help out greatly as well. I'm constantly here watching his turn meter with Blind Seer because we always want her defense up and block debuffs every time it's the turn right before he goes. So here, I'm actually going to just turn it on auto. This is going to be an enormously long battle if I don't pick up the speed. And I don't want the video to be terribly long for you. It's already going to be a long video. It is the Ice Golem tutorial, though. So, right, this is what you're going to be seeing eventually. Maybe you're not going to be doing Ice Golem 25. If you guys have requests for me to get on my new account, which is 30 days in, and do each of the dungeons on that newer account, that is something that we can do or focus on. If you guys find that helpful, I find that in most cases that of me talking to players or talking to viewers, that most of them were like, well, I'm more curious what it's going to be like later, right? Like, I understand that I'm in the early game, you know, things are just going to be difficult, or, you know, I'm not going to have access to this much damage, you know, early on. But what's it going to be like at a higher level? One thing I am worried about with this team is I actually only have one reviver, and she is getting very low on health because she's not leeching enough life back. So if I am to fail this, that's a very easy fix, is that I would remove a Chalk, even though he's freezing everything constantly, which is amazing. It's just not what I need, right? I need something that does healing or brings the party back up. I'm also not using Versolf's defensive up and ally protect ever. And that's just because I actually really like Versolf's damage, and he has a chance of putting on a leech. So there's the other big reason, is that I'm hoping that by keeping that up more frequently, alright, so right there I have lost. So my healer and main shielder died, and that's just too big of a deal. So unfortunately we have lost this, but we are able to show off the concept, right? So I'm going to let this video flop. That is perfectly fine. Understand this is what's going to happen to you guys. So you need to be able to evaluate, well, what went wrong? In this case, my biggest support, my main damage dealer, was never ever getting off, like was never getting healed. Her damage profile is just too low to rely on a leech debuff, which I have here on this card, that she was just taking way too much damage too consistently. And now that she's gone, yes, I do have a way to counter the accuracy down or the freeze from his counterattack. But now I have to pay very close attention to, okay, when is that 60% life threshold that I have to worry about? Because then I'm going to need to put this on, make sure that the strengthen and the block debuffs last long enough. And there we saw that, you know, speed tuning wise, it didn't work out. But if a player came and asked me for advice, like, hey, what am I doing wrong here? You know, the first thing I would say is, okay, well, you have a Chalk, and if he's meant to be your healer, but you have no HP burn, how are you anticipating him to heal? That's a huge, you know, an absolute massive issue that needs to be resolved. Having a healer is definitely what this team needed more than anything. Versolf never using his defense up or his ally protect maybe was a big deal. I don't have him fully booked, so it's on a very long cooldown. So I'd want to use it on the counter attacks, but admittedly, I haven't marked those HP points for myself to see. So it's very easy for me to understand, okay, what did I do wrong? So I did like a Chalk for his freezes, right? I liked her Zargala for her defense down. But the two of those concepts, even though they work well together, they're actually mildly contradictory. So if I was to replace somebody, it probably would be Zargala for a healer, potentially with an HP burn. So something like Geomancer might be a very good pick. Who else has an HP burn? Ninja has an HP burn, and he will freeze, which will work well with this. And he can do more damage to the boss. And he has a defensive down in this kit, right? So it has the defense down, the HP burn. That will help me get to that point of clearing this boss. So I'm just going to do that in my own free time. You guys understand what the concepts are. You can see how much damage he was doing. If you want to go back and rewind the video a little bit into his counterattack, and you will see how much damage that's really doing. It does like half my character's HPs a lot of the time. So things like a defensive up, huge shields, because my Blind Seer puts out a massive shield on everybody. Those things are going to be very, very important on this boss. It's a shame how the fight went. Admittedly, a Chalk also might be one of the champions that like I could easily replace. I could put in somebody like Ursula and use her as a defensive up and a strengthen, and it would probably be a bit more reliable than what I did. Again, this is a team I'll have to tinker with. Things like Syl of the Drakes or Doom Priest are also super amazing on this boss. So having that speed down, having continuous heals, having a second reviver on the team might be the path that I go going forward. Again, it's unfortunate that on this account I don't have reliable block revives, which would help. Things like Ogren Brawler or Grush, who are two of my favorite champions to go to for poisoning bosses, or Grush I consider to be like a super anti-boss. They are unfortunately of the wrong affinity. So this is where having multiple champions of different affinities build up can really help you progress through these dungeons. It just depends on what you need and what your opponent is doing. So to contradict him completely, right? I can play with Lady Kimmy, who gives my team a speed up and an accuracy boost while decreasing their speed and decreasing their accuracy. Would greatly reduce what this boss is trying to do. I just need to kind of work out what the team needs, how they're going to do it, blah, 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 blah. So guys, thank you very much for watching. I'm sorry this one was a failed video, but it is the importance of learning. If you guys want to see the video where I redo this fight and win, let me know down in the comment section below and we'll do that. Again, we stream every day over on twitch.tv/SprinkleBeard, except for Sundays. Thank you very much for watching. Until that next time, ta-ta.